This is going to be a different kind of conversation, not because the psychology changes, not because the attachment theory is suddenly irrelevant or the mechanisms described across this entire series are somehow incorrect, but because there is a version of the truth about avoidant relationships that has been underrepresented in everything covered so far. A version that gets crowded out by the more compelling, more emotionally satisfying narrative of hidden depth and suppressed love, and the wall that exists because the feeling underneath is too large to safely express. That narrative is sometimes true. Genuinely. Some avoidants do feel deeply and fear the depth and manage the distance because the alternative feels unsurvivable. That is real psychology describing real people in real situations. But some avoidants do not care about you, not in the hidden, suppressed, too large to express way. Simply, directly, in the plain, unglamorous sense of the word. They are not particularly invested in your well-being. They are not secretly devastated by your absence. They are not carrying an accumulated weight of suppressed feeling that is loading toward a reckoning. They are fine, genuinely, uncompliantly fine. Moving through their life with the ordinary quality of someone for whom the connection was convenient while it was convenient and is now simply not present. And the most important thing this video can do is help you honestly assess which situation you are actually in. The narrative of hidden avoidant depth is genuinely useful when it is accurate. When someone is actually operating from the fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant attachment style in the clinical sense, when the distance is genuinely the product of an activated defense system, managing a real underlying attachment, the framework helps. It provides accurate context for confusing behavior. It prevents the misattribution of limitation as malice. It supports the kind of compassionate clarity that allows someone to grieve what was real without constructing a false villain. But the narrative becomes harmful when it is applied to situations where it does not fit. When it is used, not deliberately, but through the very human mechanism of motivated interpretation, to find depth where there is not depth. To locate hidden caring and behavior that is more simply and more accurately described as indifference. To construct the story of a suppressed great love in the place of the more ordinary, more painful, less narratively satisfying truth that this particular person was not that invested. The motivated interpretation is understandable. It is one of the most human things available. When you have genuinely loved someone, when you have invested significantly in a connection, when you have extended the full force of your care and attention and sustained presence to another person, the idea that they simply do not care very much is harder to accept than the idea that they care enormously but cannot access it. The hidden depth narrative preserves the significance of the connection. It maintains the meaning of what you gave. It explains the behavior in a way that does not require you to confront the simpler, flatter, more deflating possibility that the investment was not mutual in any form. So how do you assess which situation you are actually in? Not through the framework alone. Not through the attachment theory that can be applied to almost any behavior in a way that locates hidden depth if you are motivated to find it. Through the honest, specific, evidence-based examination of what you actually observed. What they actually did. Not what they might have been feeling underneath the behavior. What the behavior itself, evaluated without the interpretive layer of the narrative, actually showed. Did they show up when it mattered? Not in the moments of warmth that are easy to produce, in the moments that cost something. When you were struggling, when you needed something specific, when the connection required something from them that was genuinely inconvenient. Did they find a way to be present, however imperfectly? Or was the absence in those moments reliable, consistent? The kind of consistent that is not the product of fear, but the product of not particularly prioritizing your well-being when it conflicted with their own comfort. Did they know you? Not in the performing attention way of someone who can repeat back what you said, in the genuine, accumulated, interested way of someone who was curious about who you actually are. Who asked questions that went somewhere? Who remembered things? Who noticed when something changed in you before you said anything? Who was, in the ordinary texture of interactions, actually interested in your specific, particular dimensional reality as a person? Or was the attention primarily directional, primarily about their processing, their needs, their experience, with yours as background material? Did they make repair? This one matters enormously. When something went wrong, when the distance produced hurt that was visible, when the dynamic created pain that was expressed, when you communicated clearly that something was not working, did they engage with that? Did they take it seriously enough to actually do something different, even imperfectly, even temporarily? Or was the repair absent? Was the hurt acknowledged minimally and then returned to the background? Was the expressed need received with the particular quality of someone who is waiting for the conversation to be over, rather than someone who is genuinely concerned that they caused pain to someone they care about? The repair question is particularly diagnostic because repair requires caring about the other person's experience enough to be uncomfortable on their behalf. It requires the willingness to feel the impact of your behavior on someone else, rather than managing it at a distance. An avoidant who is genuinely attached, who has the depth the narrative describes, will show some version of this, imperfect, delayed, expressed in a limited register. But present, the discomfort of having caused pain in someone they care about will be there in some form. The person who does not particularly care will not have that discomfort in any form that reaches visible expression. The repair will be absent not because they cannot access it, but because the motivation for it, the genuine concern about your experience, the investment in your well-being that makes causing you pain an uncomfortable state, requiring resolution, is not sufficiently present to generate it. There is a version of this assessment that is painful to conduct honestly, because the honest answer for some people reading this is that the evidence does not support the hidden depths narrative, that the behavior, examined without the interpretive layer, describes someone who was present when presence was convenient and absent when it cost anything, who engaged when engagement was easy and withdrew when engagement required something real, who received what was offered without the reciprocation that genuine caring produces, even in people with significant attachment challenges. If that is the honest assessment of what the evidence shows, then the most valuable thing this conversation can do is confirm it. Clearly, without the softening that the narrative provides. The person you loved may not have been an avoidant in the clinical, psychologically complex sense of someone whose defense system was managing a genuine underlying attachment. They may simply have been someone who was not that invested, who enjoyed the connection in its convenient form without being particularly moved by its depth, who took what was offered because it was offered rather than because they genuinely valued the specific irreplaceable person offering it. That is a different situation. It requires a different grief, not the grief of a genuine mutual love that was prevented from full expression by fear and limitation. The simpler, flatter, in some ways more deflating grief of someone whose investment was not matched, whose caring met something much closer to indifference than the narrative allowed them to acknowledge while they were inside the hoping. The grief of genuine indifference is different from the grief of avoidant limitation. It does not have the complicated texture of knowing the love was real underneath. It does not have the bittersweet quality of something genuine being prevented from full expression. It is simpler. And in its simplicity, it is for many people harder, because simplicity leaves less to work with, less meaning to extract, less of the narrative structure that makes loss feel proportionate to what was given. You gave something real. The giving was real regardless of what it meant. Your caring, your consistency, your sustained presence, the genuine depth of your investment, none of that is diminished by the fact that it met something less than its equivalent. The quality of what you brought to the connection is a feature of you, not of how it was received. And you're allowed to grieve the fact that what you brought was not met, not with the grief of a mutual love that could not be expressed, with the grief of real caring that met something that simply, honestly, was not its match. That grief is legitimate. It does not require the other person to have been hiding a great love in order to be worth feeling. The loss of what you hoped for is real, even if what you hoped for was never quite available in the form the hoping specified. The investment was genuine, even if the return was not. And the grief of that specific misalignment, of genuine caring meeting genuine indifference, is its own thing, complete in itself, worthy of the full, honest, unromanticized attention you would give to any real loss. Here is what changes when you accept the simpler truth, when you release the narrative of hidden depth that was never quite supported by the actual evidence, and allow the more accurate, more deflating, more honest assessment to land. The obsessive quality of the analysis stops having material to work with, because the analysis was always in part a search for the evidence that would confirm the narrative. Every piece of behavior examined for the signs of suppressed caring, every silence interpreted for the depth it might be concealing, every withdrawal assessed for what it might be protecting. The analysis required the narrative to have a question worth asking, required the hidden depth to be potentially there in order for the examination to be meaningful. When the narrative is released, when the honest assessment concludes that the evidence describes something simpler than the framework was built to address, the question changes from what is underneath this to what actually happened and what do I do with it. That is a more manageable question. A more directly answerable one one that does not require the continuous, exhausting re-examination of the same evidence in search of the interpretation that supports the preferred conclusion. What actually happened is that you loved someone who did not love you back with equivalent investment. That is painful. It is not complicated, it does not require a framework or a theory or the careful excavation of someone's early attachment history to explain it. It happens. It is one of the most ordinary, painful things available. And its ordinariness, the fact that it is not the exceptional, complicated, almost mythological dynamic of hidden love prevented from expression, is not a diminishment of what you felt. It is simply the accurate description of what occurred. What do you do with it? The same things, the grief, the honest self-examination, the building of the ground, the return to your own life, the restoration of self-trust, the gradual redirection of the caring toward the things and the people that deserve and can return it. None of those things change based on whether the person you loved was a genuinely avoidant person managing real underlying attachment or simply someone who was not particularly invested. What changes is the story you tell about it, and the story matters, not as a performance for anyone outside, as the internal narrative that shapes how you understand what happened and what it means about you and what you take forward from it. The story of a great love prevented from expression by psychological limitation is a meaningful story. It preserves the significance of the connection. But it is not the right story if it does not fit the evidence. And a story that does not fit the evidence, however meaningful, does not serve the recovery it is supposed to support. The right story, the one that fits the evidence honestly, might be simpler. Someone who was not that invested, something that was not as mutual as it felt from inside it. A connection that was real on your side and less substantial on theirs. That story is less interesting, less narratively satisfying. But it is accurate, and accuracy, as has been established throughout this entire conversation, is the only foundation on which genuine recovery can be built. The series of conversations this video is part of has covered the avoidant psychology with genuine depth and genuine care. The mechanisms are real. The attachment theory is accurate. The hidden depth, the suppressed love, the wall that exists because the feeling underneath is too large, all of that is real for some people in some situations. But this final conversation in this particular direction is an invitation to honesty, to the specific, uncomfortable narrative-releasing honesty of someone who is willing to examine what they actually observed, rather than what the framework allows them to interpret. To ask, directly and without the softening of the preferred conclusion, does the evidence actually support the hidden depth? Or does the evidence, examined plainly, describe something simpler? If the evidence supports the depth, if the behavior, honestly examined, shows the genuine signs of someone managing real underlying attachment, then everything explored in this series is relevant, and the grief is the complicated, bittersweet grief of something real that could not be fully expressed. And if the evidence does not support the depth, if the honest examination produces the deflating, simpler conclusion that this was someone who simply was not that invested, then the most loving thing you can do for yourself is accept that. Grieve it for what it actually was, rather than for the more compelling story it was not. And redirect the extraordinary capacity you have for genuine depth toward the people and connections that are actually capable of receiving it. You deserve to be genuinely cared for, not in the hidden, suppressed, theoretically present underneath the management way. Actually, visibly, in the behavior, in the repair, in the showing up when it costs something. The question is whether what you experienced was that. Answer it honestly. Your recovery depends on the answer being true, not on the answer being the one the hoping preferred. The honest examination that ended the last section, the invitation to assess whether the evidence actually supports the hidden depth narrative. That examination deserves to be extended, not reversed, not softened back into the more comfortable framework. Extended into territory that the series, in its careful and genuine attention to avoidant psychology, has occasionally skirted around. Because there is something that needs to be said about the entire project of understanding the avoidant, something that the depth and the sophistication of the framework can unintentionally obscure. The understanding can become its own trap. Not immediately, not obviously, the understanding arrives as clarity, as the relief of finally having language for something that resisted language, as the genuine, valuable experience of confusion resolving into a coherent picture. And that relief is real. The clarity is real. The value of understanding why someone behaves the way they behave, of being able to trace the behavior to its psychological roots, rather than interpreting it as a direct communication about your worth, that value is genuine. But the understanding has a shadow side that is worth examining honestly. The shadow side is this: the more comprehensively you understand someone's psychology, the easier it becomes to absorb their behavior as explained rather than experiencing it as unacceptable. The framework that says their withdrawal is fear rather than indifference, their distance is self-protection rather than disregard, their inconsistency is a nervous system responding to threat rather than a person choosing convenience. That framework is accurate enough of the time to be genuinely useful, and it is also available all of the time as a reason to continue absorbing what should not be absorbed. Understanding becomes the most sophisticated version of the excuse, not a lie, a true thing deployed in the service of a hope that the true thing does not actually support. Sit with that for a moment, because it is one of the more uncomfortable observations available in this entire conversation, and it deserves the discomfort rather than the immediate move to a more manageable framing. How much of the understanding, the careful, genuine, psychologically accurate understanding of the avoidance mechanisms, how much of it has been, in practice, a way of making the staying feel reasonable, a way of converting the evidence of insufficient investment into evidence of hidden depth, a way of answering the question, should I be here with yes, because the framework provides the material for yes, even when the actual evidence of the behavior is pointing towards something less generous. This is not a criticism. It is not the conclusion that the understanding was false, or that the framework is wrong, or that the compassion you extended was misplaced. It is the observation that understanding, in the hands of someone who loves deeply and hopes genuinely, has a tendency to outrun the evidence, to arrive at the most generous interpretation available and hold it against the simpler, less generous, possibly more accurate reading of what is actually being shown. The question the last section ended with, does the evidence actually support the hidden depth, is worth asking one more time. Not about the avoidance specifically, about the project of understanding itself. Has the understanding served you? Not in the intellectual sense, in the practical, daily life-shaping sense. Has having a comprehensive framework for why they do what they do made your life better, made the choices clearer, made the grief more manageable, made the path forward more navigable, or has the understanding provided a continuous supply of material for the hope to work with? A renewable source of reasons why the evidence, however consistently pointing in the same direction, should not be taken at face value. A framework sophisticated enough to reframe almost any behavior as potentially consistent with hidden depth, with suppressed caring, with a genuine attachment that fear prevents from full expression. If the understanding has been serving the clarity, it has done its job. If the understanding has been serving the staying, providing the intellectual architecture that makes continued investment in an insufficient dynamic feel justified, then it deserves to be examined with the same honesty that it encourages you to apply to everything else. The examination is not the abandonment of compassion. It is not the decision that avoidant psychology is simply a convenient excuse for bad behavior and that the framework is a trap for people who love too generously. The psychology is real. The mechanisms are genuine. The compassion that understanding produces is not wrong. But compassion without discernment is not compassion. It is absorption. And absorption, however compassionately motivated, however accurately theorized, does not help either person. It does not help you because it keeps you inside something that is not returning what it costs. And it does not help them because absorbed consequences are not felt consequences, and unfelt consequences do not produce the reckoning that genuine change requires. The most genuinely compassionate thing available, for yourself and, indirectly, for them, is the honest application of the discernment the framework was supposed to produce, not just the understanding of why they do what they do, the honest assessment of whether what they do is something you are willing to continue receiving, whether the behavior, however explained, meets the minimum standard of someone who is actually, demonstrably in the ordinary texture of ordinary days, genuinely invested in your well-being. That standard is not complicated. It does not require perfect emotional availability or the complete absence of the patterns that avoidant attachment produces. It requires the basic, observable, behaviorally evidenced reality of someone who tries, who shows up imperfectly but genuinely, who causes pain and engages with having caused it, who withdraws and returns with something more than the resumption of the previous dynamic, who is, in the aggregate of their behavior across time, moving towards you rather than managing the distance between you. Movement, that is the standard. Not arrival, not the complete dissolution of the fear or the full expression of the love or the wall entirely down. Just movement. The genuine, behaviorally evidenced, not requiring the framework to interpret movement, of someone who is actually in the choices they make in ordinary moments, choosing the connection over the protection. If the movement is present, however slow, however imperfect, however accompanied by the ongoing work of a nervous system that does not update quickly, then the understanding is serving its purpose. The compassion is appropriate. The patience has a genuine object. If the movement is absent, if the honest assessment of the behavior across time shows not the slow, imperfect, genuine movement of someone working against their own patterns, but the stable, consistent, pattern-confirming distance of someone who is simply not choosing differently, then the framework, however accurate, is not describing your situation, it is describing a possibility that is not currently present. The difference between those two situations is the difference between a conversation worth having and a story worth releasing, between staying with genuine discernment and staying with sophisticated rationalization, between the understanding that clarifies and the understanding that enables. Only you can make that assessment, not from the framework, from the evidence, from the honest, specific, unromantic examination of what was actually observed across time and what it actually showed, and whether the showing stripped of the interpretive layer describes someone who was trying or someone who was convenient. The answer to that question is the most important thing this series of conversations has been building toward. More important than any specific mechanism or psychological insight or framework for understanding avoidant behavior. Because the answer determines what you do next, and what you do next determines whether the understanding produced the clarity it was supposed to produce, or whether it served, in the end, as the most sophisticated version of the hope. You are intelligent enough to have understood everything in this series. You are honest enough to apply that intelligence to the actual evidence rather than to the preferred conclusion. The evidence is what it is. What does it actually show? The evidence shows what it shows, and you already know what it shows. That is perhaps the most important thing to acknowledge at this point in the conversation. Not as a rhetorical move, not as the setup for another layer of framework, but as the simple direct recognition that you came here with the answer already present somewhere in you. The searching, the understanding, the careful accumulation of psychological context. None of that was the discovery of something new. It was the slow, necessary process of building enough clarity to trust what you already knew. That knowing deserves respect, not interpretation, not one more layer of framework applied to it, just respect. The quiet, complete respect of someone who finally, after everything, is willing to let what they know be sufficient. What you know may be that the person you loved was genuinely avoidant in the clinical sense, genuinely managing real underlying attachment through a defense system built for survival, that the depth was real even when the expression was insufficient, that the limitation was genuine even when the impact was painful. You may know that, and it may be true, and the grief of it may be the complicated, bittersweet grief of something real that could not find its full form. Or you may know something simpler, that the investment was not mutual, that the depth was not hidden but absent, that the behavior, examined honestly without the framework providing its most generous interpretation, describes someone who was not particularly invested, who received what was offered without being particularly moved by the offering, whose absence in the end is not the loaded, accumulating, increasingly devastating absence of someone carrying suppressed grief, but simply the ordinary absence of someone who has moved on without significant difficulty because the attachment was not, on their end, particularly significant. Both are possible, both are real situations that real people are in, and the framework, applied indiscriminately, can make them look the same from the inside when they are not the same at all. Here is the thing about the framework that needs to be said plainly. It was built to describe a real psychological phenomenon. It does describe that phenomenon accurately. But it was not built to be applied to every person who creates distance in a relationship. Not every person who withdraws is managing suppressed depth. Not every wall conceals a great love. Not every inconsistency is the product of a nervous system activated by the threat of genuine attachment. Some people withdraw because they are not that interested. Some walls are not protecting anything particularly significant. Some inconsistency is the product of someone who is simply not prioritizing the connection, rather than someone who is desperately managing the fear of losing it. And the framework, in the hands of someone who loves genuinely and hopes persistently, has a tendency to be applied to situations it was not designed to address. To find the avoidant mechanism in behavior that is more simply and more accurately described as ordinary disengagement, the cost of misapplication is significant, because every hour spent understanding the hidden depth of someone who simply does not care very much is an hour not spent on the more important work. The grief, the honest self-examination, the building of the ground, the redirection of the extraordinary caring capacity toward things and people that can actually receive it. So the final question this series leaves you with is not about them, it is about the understanding itself, whether it served you or substituted for the simpler, harder, more directly actionable truth, whether it produced clarity or provided the material for continued hope, whether it helped you grieve accurately or helped you grieve the more interesting story rather than the actual one. That question is yours to answer, honestly, without the framework providing the answer for you, without the most generous interpretation being automatically preferred because it is more meaningful or more consistent with the depth of what you felt. What you felt was real regardless of what it meant. Your caring was genuine regardless of whether it was matched. Your depth is a feature of you regardless of whether the person you directed it toward had equivalent depth to offer. Those things are true, and they are worth knowing, and they are worth carrying forward. Not as wounds. As information about who you are. About what you are capable of. About the quality of investment you bring to the things and people that matter to you. That quality deserves a direction that can receive it. Not adequately, not approximately. Actually. Someone whose investment is real and visible and evidenced in the ordinary behavior of ordinary days. Someone who shows up when it costs something, who repairs when they cause pain, who moves toward you in the aggregate of their choices rather than managing the distance between you. That person exists. That quality of connection is available. It requires nothing from you except the willingness to stop directing your capacity towards situations where the evidence consistently says it is not being matched. The evidence. Always the evidence, not the framework, not the most generous interpretation, not the story that makes the investment feel proportionate to what was given, what the behavior actually showed, what it showed over time, what it showed in the ordinary moments when nothing particular was prompting the best version. That is the truth you came here already knowing. Trust it. It is enough.